It's another 570S maintenance video. So since there's downtime now, since everything's shut down and business is extremely slow, I decided to do some maintenance on this particular car. Previously, I've already done the brake pads, brake fluid flushed with SRF, alignment, serviced the transmission, both the transmission gear case and the clutch fluid and filters. Back in December, it went to McLaren Atlanta for its 2-year service and had the oil and filter changed and a bunch of software updates for things like the passenger side window rolling down halfway, the radio tuner and the Sirius XM tuner not found when you start the car, key fob not found. Sometimes I'd get an ESC, an electronic stability control failure, and it'd go into limp mode. The other issue is this is a track pack car that has the telemetry app, but you can't write to a USB drive, and I think it's just the owner's manual was not updated. I think what we've discovered, and I've sent emails to McLaren in England to technical support and still heard nothing back over months. Also contacted the customer relations person for the US, which was supposed to look into it. I think the issue is, unless you have a V-Box, which when this first came out, the track pack cars, it wasn't available, but unless you have a V-Box, that's what's basically collecting all the data, both video and telemetry, probably off the CAN bus, and that writes to a USB. Actually, what I've discovered is an AIM Solo DL actually captures more data and probably has more accurate on lap times. And then with a GoPro camera, you can put everything back together and probably have better video than the V-Box cameras. So there were some issues with this car. I had some funny noises and rattles coming from the engine, so I decided to just go ahead and disassemble it to figure out what's going on. Something I noticed which was really interesting is this connector right here, which is the main connector for the transmission, was not locked in. I don't know if it's been that way since it left the factory or not, but I noticed this was loose. That's what locks it in. The transmission shifted fine. That's the main controller for the transmission. If you look up here, that's actually the transmission ECU, that computer that controls the transmission, mounted above the driver's side wheel well on a left-hand drive car. And then if you go over to the other side, here is the engine ECU, which is located over the passenger's wheel well. And basically it's a Bosch ECU. I think it's similar to what's used in Mercedes. And I thought it was interesting that McLaren, who makes all of the ECUs for Formula One and all of the ECUs for NASCAR, now that they're fuel injection, doesn't make their own ECUs. And I think the answer might be is that the ones they use in the racing programs don't require any emissions. And probably the cost to develop an emission-based ECU for their street cars in low volume wasn't good enough. So they basically went to Bosch, who's a big supplier of Mercedes. And I think Bosch used to supply BMW. So one of the problems I was having is I had a very funny rattle, especially when you sit there at idle. And what we discovered was some of these heat shields, the screws had fallen out. This is the catalytic converter heat shield. Some of these screws had fallen out, and in one case, and I don't remember which side, I think it's this side, the tab for this particular bracket had broken off the actual catalytic converter. So I'll post a picture of that. We actually welded a new tab on, went back and replaced all the clips and all the bolts, so everything's bolted on. We took the O2 sensors out, cleaned them, and reinstalled them with anti-seize, which McLaren doesn't do. They just put them in and they get pretty tight after a while. So same thing on this side. We actually had some bolts that were missing on the back side and clips. All the tabs were on those catalytic converters. The other thing I discovered, which was interesting, is that this is a hose that fits the air conditioning compressor. So what you have on this side of the engine is you have the water pump, which is driven off a chain off the front of the motor, and it's connected by a belt, and this belt is basically two tooth belts are not directly connected, but this is your AC compressor. So this is like a high temp silicone little duck hose, small one like they would use, well, bigger ones are used on brake cooling. But what I noticed is in a lot of places this had split. I don't know if it was from vibration or rubbing, but there were several places where this was starting to come apart. And so, especially over here. And so rather than try to replace it and buy a new one, I used some special silicone stuff called rescue tape. And rescue tape is something that allows you to seal things up, and it's good to about 500 degrees. So this is rescue tape. We took it off, sealed it up, put it back together, and hopefully we won't have any more problems with it splitting, but it's mainly for cooling. On this side of the motor, this is actually the dry sump oil pump. And again, it's driven off a chain on the front of the engine, and it basically scavenges oil out and it sends it up. This is probably the return line, and then it feeds oil from the dry sump. The dry sump tank is located over here. That's where all your oil is stored. And these lines, one is a line going up to the tank, the other is a line feeding it. So the pump's mounted here, and on the back of this is your alternator. And again, these aren't directly connected. They have a tooth belt that basically, so you don't get vibration, and it drives the alternator here. Very compact arrangement. They don't have anything putting on the front of the motor. It's all sealed up. So, and because it's a flat plane crank V8, this pan is very close to the bottom of the motor. They've done a very good job on packaging. Ricardo builds this motor for them under license. The original design was a Nissan motor that was only used in racing. It was a V8 Nissan they used in some GTP cars, and they were going to do an IndyCar program out of it, but it never materialized. So when they shut the program down, McLaren bought the rights to the engine design, and it's modified some, but the basic design is what Nissan came up with many, many years ago. I don't remember. I think it was back in the 1980s that this original motor was designed. So anyway, that was the issue with the rattles. I had some oil that seeped down, was trying to figure out where it came from. And apparently when they did the oil service, the oil filter is located on top of the engine. And I guess when they took the oil filter out, some oil got spilled on the top of the motor, and it ran down the side and came down on this pan. It was leaking out. I thought I had an oil leak, but it's not. It was just an overflow. Fuel tank's located here under the center of the car. It's mounted up with straps and foam filters. So the fuel tank is one piece, centrally located. They were trying to get the weight in there, and you can see the filler line coming from here down. So that's basically the way that it's laid out. Everything is very tight and compact. So we're about to put it back together now that everything's done, back together. One of the other things I'm looking at is pulling spark plugs. This car only has 9,000 miles on it, but we're actually considering going to a better spark plug. I've got to do some research and find out what McLaren uses as plugs for these cars. Typically iridium plugs or platinum plugs will go lots of miles even on a turbo motor, but there are better plugs out there that I've put in other cars. So we'll see. We're going to do some research. If we find a better plug, I'll let you know. So anyway, that's the maintenance I decided to do while everything was shut down. So getting these out is not the easiest thing in the world, but you have to pull the O2 sensors before they'll come out from the top, and typically the heat shields are your problem. The driver's side is a little easier than the passenger side. I don't know why, even though it looks a little tighter. This one came out easier than the other side. So that's it for right now. If we find any more data on spark plugs or whatever, we'll post it up on the forum. So take care, everybody. Stay safe during these crazy times. The other thing I wanted to show, this is the airbox on the passenger side. You can see there's 3 screws on it, and if you remove those 3 screws, the cover comes off, and that's how you're supposed to change the air filters on these cars. You can actually do it from the top, but it's more difficult to remove all those little screws. And to do it this way, it requires you to actually pull the fender liners out of both sides. These are drains in case any water gets in there. If you actually pull it off, you need to make sure these are clear. There's no trash in there, leaves or things that can get in the airbox. So anyway, we just got through test running the car and getting everything up to temperature, make sure everything's okay. And once it cools down, we'll go check the V-bands on the turbos and all the exhaust things to make sure everything's in the right place. So car runs fine. Everything looks to be okay. No codes, no lights. Everything's working as it should. So more to follow.